I don't want to put you on the spot, Kai, but one
Oh,
question.
go on.
But I'm going to. So normally when I say I don't want to put you on the spot, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
In terms of, backstory, do you have any
Mhm.
tips for how you do that? As far as you're writing a manuscript, you've got your villain, and you want your readers to empathize with your villain
Mhm.
and understand that that character's got a backstory that might explain why they're doing what they're doing and what their motivations are. Do you have any tips on the best way to do that? How do we sort of incorporate their backstory into the story?
Oh, it's tricky. I don't tend to make my villains likable. Like I like them quite evil. Like, when they die in the end, I want that to be perfectly justified. So, but I do still give them a bit of backstory, a bit of a sad backstory. And generally it's showing, not telling. I'll show it through the dialogue, like what they might make a comment that, gives a bit of an indication of a terrible childhood, or something that's happened in the past, something that's made them vulnerable, and it's they're doing what they're doing because they don't want to be vulnerable, they want power because they don't want to be weak, that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't tend to give them too much backstory. I just focus more on developing their evilness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I guess that helps in fantasy is that often you do have very stark good and evil, because you've got somebody who wants something that's very evil. They want the dark arts or whatever.
Yeah.
Bit difficult putting that into sort of reality and crime story or something like that, where you've got some sort of sorcerer. It doesn't really work that well.
Yeah.
I think if you are writing, so I mean, me writing, typical police procedural crime, trying to make your villains believable as well. Making your readers think, well, look, there are some just bad people out there, and there's some bad people that just do bad things. But then trying to break it down to say, well, look, why are they doing these things? And I know that's something I'll try to do with my writing as I'm progressing, is try to delve more into the reasonings behind it. Might still be, wrong and immoral what they're doing, but to at least try and give the reader an opportunity to empathize a little bit with your character.
Or simply explain their actions. I mean, it may, sometimes it could be a case of, well, why on earth would they do that? They've got away with this X, Y, Z. Why would they do that? There has to be some reasoning for them to go down one track, and that maybe needed some sort of explanation.
Yeah. And I think, like, I know I sort of fluffed around the character development side of it and the backstory, but essentially, like, your villain needs the same things that your protagonist or your hero has. They need a purpose or a goal. It's often, I mean, it can be the same, but it might be different. Then you've got traits that make them likable or dislikable. And I think that's, generally, like I've said, I tend to make the villain dislikable. I don't want them to be likable. But I don't mind reading about likable villains. So I think that really does drive how your readers feel about that character. It's like, looking at things that make them likable or, again, dislikable. And then, of course, they need flaws, just like your protagonist needs. They need flaws that make them relatable or unrelatable.
Here's a
and
scenario.
beatable.
Here's a scenario for you, one that just popped into my head. Hannibal Lecter, Silence of the Lambs, and that, I know we saw the first movie when it came out, but it's actually part of the, what's his name, Thomas Harris, the Hannibal Lecter omnibus. There's actually 4 books, and the first one is called Red Dragon. But when we were first introduced to Hannibal Lecter, I know you talked, Kaya, about conflict between the villain and the hero. What about when there's a relationship between the hero and the villain? For example, Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter. We know that Hannibal's a homicidal maniac that eats people, but he's behind bars. But he then almost becomes an ally of Clarice in helping to solve another homicide. He's got his own motivations for doing that. But
he's manipulating her.
He's manipulating. So it's complex. It's not just, it's creating these different layers. What are your thoughts on that type of relationship between the villain and the hero?
I really admire storytellers who can do that and do it well. I think it's hard to do. Like, mind you, I've not tried to do it, but yeah, I think it would be a very delicate balance to get it right. And because also, yeah, that well, me personally, watching, The Silence of the Lambs, and then I've watched the Hannibal Lecter series as well. Like, you're sort of toing and froing with whether you like this guy or not. Like, you know he's inherently evil, but again, he's only eating the bad guys. So
Exactly. It's just he and Dexter should team up. That would make for a cool show.
yeah.
So there's also a comment here that we've talked about anti-heroes and anti-villains in fiction, but and how this might differ across different genres of fiction. Can you sort of speak to that?
Yeah, I think because I tend to stick in my sort of genres of your young adult, your fantasy, romance. Yeah, like there has been a real trend for the morally grey, like not just your main character, not just your hero, but then also that love interest. I'm curious to know, because I don't tend to read outside of that. Like, what's it like for you guys in your genres? How does that look, like the morally grey and your anti-hero? Like, is there a real trend at the moment, like the same kind of trend?
I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, I don't tend to try and follow trends. I mean, I'll just sort of like look for the next book that I can download off Audible or something like that, that's going to be free or is included with Audible, and sort of catches my eye, and then I'll start to listen. So I'll also obviously follow. If somebody tells me you need to read this one, I'll read that. So trying to actually work out trends in current books that are coming out is I just don't have the time to do that. I spend most of my time is spare time. I'll try and get some writing done, or on my own stuff, rather than trying to work out what the current trends are. It's probably something I should work on, but I don't know. I mean, obviously police procedurals and sort of crime stuff tends to be pretty cut and dry as to who the good people are and who the bad people are. Obviously, you get your crooked cops and morally grey in that respect, but usually they're the bad guys eventually, the ones who are breaking the rules, because you then discover that they've been breaking the rules during the story, and then immediately that sort of like focuses the reader's attention on, well, if they're doing that and they're prepared to do that, then probably they've got something to do with what's going on. I don't know. What's your take, Jack?
I know with my first book of my crime series called The Angels Wept, I had a bad villain. He was evil. He was doing bad things, but I tried to at least justify he'd suffered some trauma. There was some things happened. His child had died, and his ex-spouse had tried to kill him, although he was a domestic violence offender and was a bad man. But that sort of fueled his desire for revenge, and he just became a bit deluded. And then became a bit of a cult figure. And then in book 2 and book 3, you kind of got the same villain. And I tried to develop a similar sort of thing as the Hannibal Lecter sort of thing, where you got this killer who's going around doing bad things, but he's doing it because of revenge, and he's systematically handpicking his victims. We find out later, because of childhood trauma where he received horrific burns, he's seeking all the people out that he felt did him injustice, all the people in the justice system, the perpetrator, all the people that didn't support him. And as a child, he's come back as this, this guy coming back seeking his own justice. But then in book 3,
do we have to do any spoiler alerts here?
Oh, that's right. Not giving too much away here. But then in book 3, it's almost a point where he and the detective form a bit of a relationship where they both are in a position where they both could have killed each other, but they both didn't. They've almost formed this mutual kind of respect for each other. And so I'm trying to build that kind of relationship between the villain and the hero, where there is clearly a good versus evil, but you can start to understand where they're both coming from. I was just going to throw in as another example. One I like making reference to is there's the True Detective series. There's been a number of them. Most recently, there was one with Jodie Foster, but the original was the one back in about 2004. Now, I don't know if you know this one with Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson. It was fantastic, and again, for me, loving crime dramas, this was a brilliant one. Do you guys are you familiar with that one at all? True Detective.
I've heard of it, but I've not. No.
You've mentioned it once or twice before, but
I know,
I haven't actually got around. I haven't actually got around to watching it.
It's absolutely brilliant. For people who love crime drama, definitely watch True Detective, the original one. Anyway, what happens is you got these two detectives, and they are good detectives, but they cross the line and they have to do bad things, and in fact, even kill people in order to catch this serial killer. So, in order, for the greater good, these people they were killing were drug dealers, and they were killing other people, and they were just horrific, horrible people. And then they're having this conversation, they're lamenting between each other in the car. And one of them says, after they've gone off and they've had to do this pretty horrific thing in order to catch this or take out this bad person, one of them says to the other, are we bad men? And his partner says, the world needs bad men. We keep the other men from the door. And I just love that idea of, you got to do bad things to stop bad things from happening to other innocent people. And I really love that type of, so here are these two cops who are, in essence, good people, but they're willing to do pretty bad things for the greater good. So they're the kind of stories that I really enjoy.
I remember, I think it was, I stand corrected if I get this wrong, but I think it was in Cliffhanger, the movie. There was the bad guy in that one, where the planes crashed, and he made some comment that was, you kill a few people and you're called a serial killer. You kill a few thousand, you're called a conqueror, and it's all down to the the context.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, I really think you should watch The Gentleman, Jack. You'd like it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, okay, I will. I'll add that on my list.
You like Guy
It's
Ritchie?
very funny.
Like it.
Guy Ritchie. It's very funny.
Yeah. Okay. All righty. And now, Kai, you've mentioned, you've used the term a few times, that morally grey. Why do you think readers, viewers love this whole notion of the morally grey?
Oh, again, I think it is a bit of escapism. Like it's, you like these characters, you don't mind that they're doing these bad things. If it was for example, I just think of, like there's a lot of stories at the moment where the love interest is very much morally grey. And,
can you just explain that? Sorry, can you just explain what you mean by that?
So the love interest in a book. So typically, when we were talking about the character development of, the protagonist and then the villain or the antagonist. In a lot of like the young adult fiction that I'm reading, and like your romance stories, the character development or the backstory tends to be around your main character and then the love interest. So you've got, both characters who are somewhat morally grey, but in particular, the love interest. There's this real trend. It's what people are really wanting. Essentially, he's a bad guy, but he loves her. She's different from the rest. He'll do anything for her. He'll kill thousands for her. And we love to read that. But, if that was real life, we might be a bit worried and a bit scared of that person. but yeah,
fair enough. Yeah.
Fiction, it's quite thrilling, I think, to have this character who is evil, but there's that potential for change because they love the main character, or it's they have this softer side just for the main character.
And you think that this whole notion of morally grey feeds into, kind of, I've mentioned it before, but we as people all often, I know I've asked the question of myself, what would I do if I was in that situation? Would I kill to protect my own child, for example? You could throw up a whole bunch of hypotheticals. What would I do if I was in a situation? How far would I go? Could I become a villain if the circumstances were such that, we just don't know? And I guess it's that nature versus nurture kind of argument. Are a lot of these villains, do they become villains because of their experiences, or are they just inherently evil people? Maybe they're a bit of both. I don't know. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's interesting though, because I have a bit of a love triangle in my series, and I'll have readers. So there's your typical, golden-eyed, tall, ruggedly handsome, love interest, and then you've got this colder, darker, again, more morally grey. They're both kind of morally grey, but this guy's grown up that way. He's been, bred that way, And yeah, so the main character, or Freya, she's torn between the two. Not, well, sort of, not really, but she's, she's pulled both ways. And so I'll have readers messaging me saying, please tell me that she's going for this, she'll end up with this bad guy. I'm like, come on, why? I'm like, I mean, we don't know yet. There's still another book to come out. But yeah, it's really interesting that people really seem to want that. Like, go for the morally grey, go for the guy who's worse, who's done terrible things. And yeah, I just found it quite fascinating that that's what people seem to be attracted to in, yeah, just that darker side, people with a bit of a darker side, but again, a soft spot for the protagonist.
I think that a long time ago, in one of the previous podcasts, somebody had made some comment about, as a paramedic, how can you possibly be writing about evil people doing, and sort of, do you find it difficult to write about sort of the bad side of people and things like that? And it's like, no. You as a social worker, is that right?
Oh, look, I think part of that's why I've chosen to write fantasy, because it's, yeah, it's sort of, it's pure escapism with a little bit of, there is some life lessons to learn in there, but in general it is, it's just something completely out of this world, and that's what I prefer to read. I mean, I still write the same kind of issues that come up, of course, in real life, but I'm not going to write about any kind of non-fiction or anything too heavy. And again, why I've probably chosen young adult, because it does tend to have lighter themes.
Yeah.
I was thinking, when you're talking about the love triangle, I'm thinking, Twilight, is she going to fall for the vampire, or is she going to fall for the werewolf? They're both killers, but which one is she going to, which is less, I don't know. We all know how that one pans out, don't we?
Yeah, that's it. And to be honest,
I can't remember
really. I think Twilight is somewhat responsible for that change in trend in young adult fiction, because she does end up with the vampire and the one that's the bad guy, but he's such a good guy and he loves her and he's obsessed with her, a little too obsessed in my opinion, but I still enjoyed the books.
And I guess that's a real different take, isn't it? And I suppose that's exactly what we're talking about, the different moral greys, is that typically the vampires are the evil killers of humans. They treat humans like cattle and hunt humans down. Here we have a love interest who's a vampire, and
but he sparkles. So
so is that because he's chosen? He doesn't kill humans. He'll hunt deers and.
I know all the vampires sparkle in Twilight.
Oh, okay. So some of them are.
They can go in the sunlight. That they're not. They don't have to stay in the dark. But when they're in the sunlight, they sparkle.
He's a new age vampire. Modern vampires sparkle. They don't burn up in the clouds of dust if they get hit by sun. Okay. Now, one final question. This was another thing I'm going to talk about in terms of blurring the lines between heroes and villains. We talked about the moral grey, and so where we're posing questions around, are we going to go with the vampire or the werewolf? And as the writer, you've already identified who you think your protagonist is. How do we keep readers rooting for the protagonist, and how do we make sure that they don't, go jump over to the other side and bat for the villain?
I think essentially it's still keeping them likable. Like, again, I go back to the Walter White. He's done terrible things, but he's still likable, and there's still that character arc. That something that makes them good. Like, they need that character growth, that development.
I think he lost it a bit towards the end, to be quite honest.
Maybe Walter White's not the best.
So I guess we look at just to sort of wrap things up from your workshop. What would be some key takeaways then? Is for writers who are thinking about developing their characters, developing their let's call it simply heroes and villains. What would you say would be some sort of key takeaways, or key to leave our listeners with some key ideas?
Again, when you're looking at both characters, you're looking, and what is their purpose and what is their goal. And that's something whenever I find I'm getting stuck in my writing that I go back to. If I feel my character's getting lost, what is their purpose and what is their goal? You know, what makes them likable or dislikable? What are their strengths and their flaws? And just really, just look at those, develop those through your story. And then naturally that, you know, if they've got differing goal, or they've got like your protagonist and your antagonist, if they've got different goals, and that makes the conflict easy. If they've got the same goal, but they're going about it a different way, then it's looking at it's looking at, I guess, making them likable versus dislikable to kind of drive that story, or like, you know, whatever the morals are behind why they're doing what they're doing. It's a bit tricky. I'm much better at doing this when I have a PowerPoint in front of me. But essentially,
you're not allowed PowerPoint on podcasts. It doesn't work so well.
And then it's looking at developing those flaws on both sides. I think they're really important for making characters relatable. If you've got at least a relatable protagonist, and you've got that conflict, then you'll keep readers interested, and you'll keep them reading.
You mentioned that you used, or when you first started writing, you used all of your experience that you developed with talking to people and your line of work to develop your characters and things like that. Do you think any of them would actually recognize themselves in any of your characters?
I don't think so. I can't say I've used people specifically. No. It's funny. I remember being asked when I'd written the books if, any characters were based on people, like, is the villain someone you don't like? And I feel like that doesn't give your character room to develop themselves, like to become something unique. Like if, for me anyway, it's the same with if I try to write out a plot, I get stuck because now I have these lines that I have to stay between, and I really get stuck in my writing. It's the same with character development. If I had this idea of somebody in my head, then I'd find it hard to develop the character outside of that. So it's more, I think, seeing how different people, they go through really tough times in their lives, and seeing how they respond to that and grow through that is very different. So I draw on that more so.
Right.
And people's natural responses to conflict and to trauma and all of that.
I think I'll often amalgamate people that I know into one character, and sort of like traits from one person and looks from another, and then just amalgamate it, and then sort of throw them into the story. And that's something that I'll do. But of course, you've got to put a disclaimer on it. It's a very clear disclaimer that there's any sort of similarity is just pure.
And I do that to a degree, but I do that more with made-up characters. So Hannibal Lecter, for example, does inspire one of the characters in one of my books. But it's more his body language. Like, and as in, what's his name? Mads Mikkelsen, when he plays Hannibal in the series. Just his body language. It was really good to draw on that for describing the character and for showing and not telling. So I will draw on fictional characters, but not real people so much.
And I guess you can also magnify the attributes as well. You might have some that in real life, and you can really blow out and really exaggerate some of their character traits to make them really interesting characters.
I have done that.
I'll have to admit, and this is I may have mentioned it before, but I have. If I get really pissed off with somebody at work, then I'll often use either their surname or their first name in some asshole character that I've just created, and that way just makes me feel so much better. They'll never know, but
I am tempted to do that with the characters that you kill off pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But you try not to name those. You don't want too many names in your room.
And you can be really creative in the way you kill them off too. And take some pleasure. Take some pleasure in how you do it. Hey guys, we probably should wrap up now.